Part 2. First, let's drop the intro. This is the Vega Pod, inviting you to look at the issues through a biblical lens. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to continue with part 2 of our video on Rosh. It's not modern day Russia. While most modern translators opt to translate the word in question as chief prince or something along those lines, there are still some that opt to use Rosh. As we'll see here, this has led to the supposed connection to Russia. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Let me scroll up here really quickly. Make sure we hide the logo. Make sure you guys get as full of a picture as possible. There's a lot of text in the slides, so I want to make sure that you can see it. And let me do this here. Cool. So, in this theological system, now this is again approaching it from the premillennial dispensation, if I'm not mistaken. It could just be premillennial view. So, in this theological system, so much emphasis has been placed upon an eschatological tribulation period that it was almost assumed that Ezekiel 38:39 belonged there. I would like to make the confession, as an advocate of this system myself, that this conclusion has come about as a result of a somewhat backwards methodology. Now, but what it sounds like to me here, it sounds like he's saying that instead of exegeting, they're reading this system into the text. Rather than starting with the tribulation in which many a fierce battle will transpire, and assuming that the battle of Gog belongs there, I would suggest that a more proper approach should be from the opposite direction. That is, the development of Old Testament themes that progressively emerge subsequent to Israel's exodus from Egypt. Rosh, as a place name, and these next few slides are going to be from the Journal of the Evangelical Theological Society, and the title of the article is Rethinking Ezekiel's Invasion by Gog, J. Paul Tanner. Rosh as a place name. The remainder of 38, verse 2, Ezekiel, is beset with translation difficulties. The NASB adds that Gog is the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. The NIV, on the other hand, translate the same phrase as the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Cross reference also RSV. Hence, the question arises as to whether Rosh is a place name or a descriptive adjective modifying prince. The question is quite relevant because if Rosh is not a place name, then the etymological connection with Russia is eliminated. I'm going to repeat that here because this is important, right? Most of the modern translations, including the ESV, the NIV, do not account for Rosh as a place name. However, because at some point it was accounted as a place name, this has led to this idea of Rosh in Russia, which has also gave credence to this idea of Magog as in being Russia, right? They're connected. A lot of it is because they're within the same set of verses. The question is quite relevant because if Rosh is not a place name, then the etymological connection with Russia is eliminated. Any identification of Meshech with Moscow and Tubal with Tobolsk is quite unfounded. We read this in the last video in some of those slides. Yamalshi states, since the late 19th century, Assyrian texts have been available with which locate Meshech, Mashku, and Tubal, Tabal, in central and eastern Anatolia, respectively. These will be located in what is today modern Turkey. For Ezekiel, Meshech and Tubal were not Russian cities, but ancient ethnic groups that carried on trade with Tyre. Evaluation of the Russia connection. The connection of the Gog passage of Ezekiel 38:39 with Russia rests on two primary arguments: the etymological relationship of the place names and the reference to the remote parts of the earth. As demonstrated above, the use of the place names to make an argument for Russia is extremely weak. Let me repeat that. As demonstrated above, the use of the place names to make an argument for Russia is extremely weak. Rosh is better translated chief, and the other names are clearly identified with people groups of the Middle East. The phrase in Ezekiel translated remote parts of the north does not have something so restricted as Russia to the far north of Israel. Let me repeat that last one again. The phrase in Ezekiel translated remote parts of the north does not have to mean something so restricted as Russia to the far north of Israel. A careful study of Yarkei Sapon or Safon, reveals that it either means a place of high elevation or that it refers to countries of the Middle East in closer proximity to Israel. North refers not so much to the precise geographical direction from Israel, but rather to the direction of advance and attack upon Israel. Armies came against Israel from the north. This is how Jeremiah viewed Babylonia, though Babylonia was technically to the east. Consequently, there is no firm basis on which to interpret Gog as Russia. I have to repeat that because this is important. North refers not so much to the precise geographical direction from Israel, but rather to the direction of advance and attack upon Israel. Armies came against Israel from the north. This is how Jeremiah viewed Babylonia. Though Babylonia was technically to the east, Jeremiah viewed Babylonia as from the north. Jeremiah and Ezekiel would have been contemporaries. We can't just overlook that. And then I hate to kind of beat a dead horse and continue to repeat myself, but it's necessary because you have these people making these connections once again and promoting these ideas. For me, it saddens me, right? We have to interpret scripture in light of scripture. We can't just put our views into the text. What breaks my heart a little bit more is that I see this affecting predominantly Spanish churches. As I do some searching to figure out where this idea is coming from, I've had a hard time finding responses in Spanish to these false ideas. So I'm bringing it to the attention, obviously because it's false. But as someone who is a Spanish speaker and has Spanish family members who attend predominantly Spanish churches, this is this is sad. Consequently, there is no firm basis in which to interpret Gog as Russia. So those who are being overly dogmatic between Gog and Russia, for one, the connection isn't there. But if you want to continue to do so, there is no firm basis on which to interpret it. You are reading it into the text. I said it. It is what it is. There is no place name, and this is from Michael Heiser's Naked Bible podcast. This is the transcript to episode 152 on Ezekiel 38 through 39, part one. If you haven't already checked out Michael Heiser, I would encourage you that you do. This podcast is great. He has links to the articles. He actually, and I found this out later on after I did my prep, he includes one of J. Paul Tanner's articles, which we looked at, I believe, in the last video, and the notes to this podcast episode. There's no place name. There's no place name Rosh. There's no place named Rosh known in the ancient world. So I don't know why I had to read that three times. Period. It's not a place name. Rosh is not a place. As Michael Astor has noted, the closest geographical correlation that could be argued as Rashi or Arashi in the Neo-Assyrian records, a district on the border of Babylonia and Elam. But as Astor comments, this has nothing in common with Meshech and Tubal. He's correct. It doesn't. It's in a different geographical region to the southeast. It doesn't point to Russia. That would be far north of the Black Sea. Again, the point being made is that nobody in the ancient world knew of a place named Rosh. Again, it has to make sense to them before it makes sense to us. The prophecies aren't to us. Prophecies are to the people living contemporary with Ezekiel or in the near future. It has to make sense to them. In this episode, Michael Heiser makes the case that this is a linguistic fallacy. He uses the examples of Chin in English and Chinese and how they mean two very different things. Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, if you haven't already, definitely check it out. And let me flip back here. All right. Let me jump back on your screen. Here I am. BK Apologist. If you haven't already, subscribe to his channel. BK Apologist. He has a video about Gog and how this figure seems to be supernatural. He is quoting from Michael Heiser's book, The Unseen Realm. The Unseen Realm. If you haven't checked out the book, definitely check out the book. But I would encourage you, after you're done here, I'm going to include a link to BK Apologist's video in the video description. Check out his video. He makes a very good connection that I think is something we have to consider as well. Seems to be pointing more to a supernatural idea as opposed to a modern country or nation. Thanks for tuning in. I'll catch